Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Entrepreneur Motivation Podcast. I am your host, Chris Bello, and today I've got Ian Altman on the show. Ian, welcome.
Thanks for having me here, Chris.
Great to have you. And like I mentioned before we hit record, I'll let you do the intro because sometimes it just, I don't want you to sit there and listen to me read your intro or your bio. So who are you, Ian, and what are you up to? I can see Same Side Selling behind you, but take it away.
I don't know, Chris. I was hoping you would intro me because then I could learn something. But
what do I do?
Someone on my team probably wrote something that's better than I would say. But I'll give you a little bit of background. I'm probably best known for the book I co-authored with a guy named Jack Quarles called Same Side Selling. And it's all about how instead of being pitted in these adversarial traps, buyer against seller, how we end up on the same side putting a puzzle together. And before I did that, I had my own companies that I grew to a value where I grew the companies, sold them, and then grew the parent companies to values in excess of $1 billion. And I spent the last 13 or so years just helping other people grow their businesses. And I've done a ton of research on how people make and approve decisions. You can read hundreds of articles I've written in Inc. and Forbes. I had a longstanding column in those. And these people at Global Gurus keep ranking me in the top 30 people in the world as sales gurus, and my sales development platform called the Same Side Selling Academy is ranked in the top 5. And I don't know how those things work, but it's always nice to be recognized by somebody.
That is cool. I mean, you're right. Even with me being a top 100 business podcast, I'm like, according to what? Are these accurate? But I'll take it. I'm going to promote it still. So, I think it's safe to say that if you are getting some of those awards, you're doing some amazing things. So congrats on all of that success, and growing your companies to an excess of $1 billion in value is another awesome achievement. So congratulations once again on all of that.
Yeah, you know what? Even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. So that's the way I look at it. And there may be a few things we've learned over the years. You never know.
I think so. But like you said, at a certain point, the blind squirrel is finding a nut after another nut and just seeing success after success. You're like, okay, there's something to the squirrel. The squirrel has figured something out.
Yeah, there definitely is something to that. And it's interesting. When I look back to my prior businesses, we were always a pretty high growth company. And it wasn't until I discovered how to, in essence, teach other people how to sell and grow that we really took off. So we always grew pretty well, but I was the rate limiting factor, which is the case, I think, with a lot of entrepreneurs. Is maybe they get to the point in their business where it's grown as far as they can push it. But then when they hire other people to try and sell, those people aren't as effective. And then they say, oh, well, I have to do it all. But you can't do it all. And it was a really hard lesson for me to try and figure out how to pivot that so that other people were driving the sales. Yeah,
that's powerful what you just said there, because we are oftentimes our own bottleneck, and our businesses can only grow to the extent that we do. And so for us to grow, we have to train others to take that mantle and take the torch, so to say, and carry that on to really scale up. So there's a lot of nuggets in what you just said there for those listening who are still trying to do everything, because the buck stops with you at that point versus training up a team who can kind of carry that on and scale your business up entirely.
Absolutely. And the challenge with all this is that what happens is, as an entrepreneur, when you're growing, there are things that you do that you're not necessarily consciously or intentionally doing that lead to your success. And then what happens is, very often people say, well, I hired this person in sales. Well, how did you train them? Oh, I just had them follow me around for a while. And so what happens is the person does what they see you doing. And so it would be like someone following around a sommelier in a restaurant and saying, well, you're going to learn everything about wine service this way. And you get somebody who's nothing about wine, but they drape a napkin over their arm. And you're like, well, what are you doing? Well, that's what I picked up. What I picked up is that you drape this napkin over your arm. It's like, they didn't pick up the part about opening the bottles, about researching the different wines, right, about knowing everything, but they picked up on that one piece that's somewhat irrelevant. It happened to be the way that person serves wine, but no one else does. And so when you have people just follow you around and observe, you're not sure what they're going to observe. Like all of a sudden you get a guy where you're like, well, he sucks, but he's wearing the same shoes as me. Well, yeah, that's what he picked up. He picked up the same shoes.
That's an interesting example, because you're so right that whenever there's no structure or process or standard operating procedures, you're kind of just learning, and one person may take away something that someone else doesn't, and vice versa. And so I think that kind of speaks to the importance of developing processes and procedures to train people with. Is that a huge part of what you were doing at your organization as well? Or your
Yeah, so
organizations?
it's a lot of it. In fact, in my in my current business, a lot of it is building that structure. So if you think about it, there are three kind of core components that people need to have if they're going to be successful in any type of sales role. One is they need to have a consistent process and vocabulary. So if each person is kind of doing their own thing, then if one person's outperforming another, you don't know if it's because of they're using a different process or if they're better skilled or if they have better leads. If you standardize, then anybody can come in, help anybody else, and you start to see patterns of success or failure. The second thing that people need is something that I often refer to as a playbook that says, so what happens when this situation presents itself? For example, they seem really interested. Now they're not returning our phone calls. What do we do? They said, hey, your stuff is great, but you're more expensive than the other people. What do you do? Oh, we really like your stuff. We want you to deal with procurement, but you don't want to deal with procurement. So what do you do in each of those situations? So they need a playbook to handle that. And the last part is people need a platform where they can practice and get coaching and mentoring. Because if you're doing all this stuff, but you get no feedback, then you might be practicing bad behaviors. And what happens is you get really good at doing the wrong thing. And so there's those three things in combination that are critical. And when you hit those, that's when you start to see people really achieving amazing success. And then once you have that foundation, then it comes down to how do we start the process? How do we capture people's attention so they're interested in what we have so we can determine if we can help?
I love that. So just to reiterate, this is what I jotted down, the 3 points. First, consistent process. Second is having a playbook, like what happens when a certain thing, situation happens. And then the third is a platform to practice and get feedback, which is extremely important. And I'm actually in real estate sales, and a lot of what we do is script, role play, script practice, objection handling, because you're going to get kind of a handful of objections usually if you're in the certain type of business that are similar. And so I think maybe 10 to 15 objections is like what I can usually bank on getting from a new client. And if I've never practiced how to handle those, I'm going to be like, oh, well, you should just work with me because I'm great.
Because I've spent some time with you. Right? It's like people
invested 20 minutes together. Yes.
People always give their own reasons for why the client should work with them. It's like, well, I mean, we had 5 meetings.
Like,
they don't
we've
care.
invested so much time together. We might as well just work together. And at that point,
it makes saying you've been dating somebody and it hasn't been going well. And you're like, well, we've been dating for a year. We may as well get married.
Right.
It's like, no, I don't like you. But I mean, I'm looking at it. We've gone out 63 times.
Yeah.
I suppose we should just get married. And it's like, no, I decided that you're not someone I want to hang out with. So it's, it's those sorts of things that get a little bit goofy. And that notion of, when you say scripts, I mean, one of the traps with scripts, it's funny. We have something on samesideselling.com, which is the 7 scripts that everyone should follow for more effective sales. And I'll let you know a little secret, which is they aren't scripts, because the problem is we've all been on the receiving end of a salesperson reading a script. So I'm sure you have, right? Have you ever received a phone call from somebody who's reading a script?
Every day.
Okay. So how do you know? How do you know if it's over the phone that they're reading a script?
You could just tell maybe they're not putting pauses in there. It just sounds like they're legitimately reading off of a script.
Yeah, they're not saying their words; they're saying someone else's words.
Right.
So
it feels inauthentic.
Exactly. It's exactly inauthentic is a great way to say it. And so for me, what I look at is people need to understand what we're trying to achieve at each step in the process. We can give examples of what that might sound like. And then I tell people you have to turn it into your own words. So it sounds like something you would say. Now, if a year from now you say it the same way I would say it, that's fine. But initially, if the way I say it isn't comfortable for you, then you should come up with your own way of saying it, because you will be more successful saying your words, even if they're not as well crafted as you would if you were just saying my words.
Right.
So once you're authentic and can truly connect with people, then it'll morph. And it's interesting because people will say, Yeah, so a year ago, you gave us these suggestions, and I said that wasn't comfortable, and I came up with my own way. And then over time, I've adapted it. Now here I am a year later, and I look, and it's exactly what you had suggested. I said, yeah, but if you had said it back then, it would have sucked. It wouldn't have worked for you. But now you've like evolved, and they became your words, and that's the key to it. So scripts sometimes are a little bit dangerous, but the idea of practicing, it's fascinating. In every other industry, the top performers practice the most. So the top basketball players practice more than everybody else. The top baseball players practice more than everybody else. You say, okay, well, forget about sports. Fine. The top musicians, do they practice more or less than the other people? Well, more. Okay. Only in sales and entrepreneurship do people say, no, I'm good. I'm already so good that I don't need to practice.
That's so true.
Right? I don't need to practice these interactions because I'm already just that brilliant and I'm so good at it. Like, forget about the best hitter in baseball. Sure, they have to practice, but they're not at my level because I don't need to practice. And then the big excuse that people give is, well, it's uncomfortable. And to which I say, great. So would you rather screw up with a colleague when it doesn't count, or would you rather screw up with a real client when it does count? Because that's the decision you're making. Like, I would much rather mess up 4 times with a colleague where it doesn't count if we mess up and we learn something than, oh, I just blew this huge deal because I didn't know how to deal in this situation.
Exactly. I'm just laughing because I kind of get stuck in that a little bit too. I'm like, well, I've been closing so many deals. Like, that's my practice, but you're right. It is better to just practice with a colleague than on the fly, because we have all been in the situation talking to clients and they ask you that question that kind of stumps you and you can't BS your way out of every single conversation. You're kind of like, I don't know the answer to that question. And you don't necessarily look prepared or competent in some cases. Had you practiced, it could have been a different situation entirely.
Yeah. The funny part is, so my buddy Clay does something called the perfect intro.
Okay.
And one of his pet peeves for people is he says, look, that in any type of networking environment, anytime you meet somebody, they're going to say, hey, what do you do? And people stumble through that every time. It's not like it's a shock.
Everybody asks you that at every single event.
You should know exactly what you want to say, how you want to say that. At the time, he actually goes through a 6-word intro. So for him, it's how do you do it in 6 words? And so it'd be like, oh, we're the Uber for such and such. Right. Or we solve this for this type of person. And it just creates enough that piques someone's interest that says, I want to learn more. He's someone who, if he's open to it, would be a good guest for people to hear from as well. But
absolutely.
But it's the whole idea of how do we capture and captivate people's attention early in the process? Because let's face it, especially after this pandemic, the amount of horrific and just epic fail sales pitches you get on LinkedIn and everywhere else.
Oh my gosh.
I have a folder in my email called stupid marketing. And it's soon becoming the largest folder in my email system. And it's just these epic fails of people where they lead with things that just put them in a bad place. One of the biggest complaints that entrepreneurs have is, well, we're offering this stuff at a premium level and our clients just focus on price. I don't know how often you hear that, but it's like, oh, all they care about is price. Yep. And if you listen in on phone calls, most people, when they're initially talking to somebody, they say, oh, you're doing this right now? Yeah. Well, we might be able to save you some money. So what have you just signaled to your client? What you said is the most important thing is money. And then shockingly, they say, yeah, you're right. That is all I care about is the money. And now you're in this vicious cycle of like, they're just focused on money and so are you. The reality is that if they don't get the results they're looking for, it doesn't matter how much it costs. It's not a good deal. So we need to figure out how do we make it so that with our clients and prospects, we're focused on the problem they're trying to solve, what happens if they don't solve it, and what does the result or success look like? If we have that little dialogue, then it's never about price.
Right.
But if you just focus on, I can save you money, then as Seth Godin says, it's a race to the bottom that you might unfortunately win.
Exactly. Nice. So what problem are we actually solving instead of focusing on the price? Because you're right. I see a lot of people do that. They try to compete on price, and that is a race to the bottom very quickly versus focusing on the benefits and the outcome that the customer or client is actually seeking. And then at that point, they don't care much about the price because the value should exceed what the price is ideally.
Exactly. In fact, I like to look at it often as a medical metaphor. So the medical metaphor would be this. Instead of pitching your treatment, hey, you want some ibuprofen? Hey, you want some amoxicillin? Like whatever. What you have to do is you have to seek out the symptoms that are an indication of a potential condition that you're good at treating. So what you have to ask yourself is this, and there's something that in same side selling we refer to as the same side pitch. And a buddy of mine, Bob London, coined this term called the elevator rant. So we all know what an elevator pitch is. An elevator pitch is that brief 15, 20 seconds about what you do. The elevator rant is the inverse of that says, okay, what would your clients complain about that you're good at fixing? So for example, if you're in the is it commercial or residential real estate?
Residential.
So in the residential real estate, you can say to people, why sell houses? Okay, great. So does everybody. You can say, well, my clients come to me when they're trying to find that perfect balance between the right property, the right school system, the right neighborhood, the right community without overpaying for it. And they want to find that perfect balance that is the lifestyle they want, where they feel like they're surrounded by peers who they want to hang out with. And it's like, yeah, okay. So the problem you're solving for them is that, wow, they can't find that type of community. And it's a different story. Or if you're dealing with a homeowner and it's you're trying to get listings from them, your position might be, when people come to us because they're thinking that eventually they're going to downsize and they're not sure when's the right time to do it. They're not sure what type of improvements they should be making to their house in preparation for that. And of course, some things, like you don't want to put new windows in your house right before you sell it because you'd like to benefit from those new windows. But other things you may want to do right before you sell it so that when it shows, it's better off. And we often guide people through that, kind of map out a course so that over the next 5 years, they know exactly what they're going to do, when and how they're going to do it. So it's not a fire drill in the end.
Right.
People are like, oh, yeah, that sounds great. Instead of waiting for someone to say, I'm ready to sell my house right now. And they say, well, will you do it for fewer points than somebody else? If you guide them through that process, you've got their listing.
Exactly.
Because you helped them identify the condo they're moving into and everything else. So it's that notion. So the idea is that it's focusing on the problems that you solve, and the way you introduce it is through that. So for example, I could say to people, well, I help people improve their sales, business development, and marketing. Well, that's kind of boring because not everyone needs that. But if I said, look, my clients come to me when 2 or 3 things that usually happen. One is that their clients are focused entirely on price instead of results. The second is they get compared to inferior alternatives who shouldn't even be in the mix. Mm-hmm. And the third thing is that they've got great stuff, but they just can't capture the attention of their ideal clients. For the right organizations, they tell me we can deliver amazing results for them. Only about half the people I talk to are the right fit for that. So I don't yet know that we can help you, but if those are things you're facing, I'm happy to learn more to see if we might be able to help. And that's something we call the same side pitch. And it follows the structure of entice, disarm, and discover. So first, I entice by sharing problems that we solve with dramatic or extraordinary results. I then disarm the notion that I'm just there to sell something by acknowledging that not everyone's a good fit for us, which happens to be true. Then I trigger a discovery phase to learn more about their situation to see if we can help. And so that way, instead of saying, I'm the greatest, and they say, yeah, I doubt that, you're saying, I help people solve these problems, and for the right people, they get great results. We can't help everybody. And what goes through their mind is, well, I hope I'm in the group you can help. And now who's selling whom? So now they're saying, well, Chris, why couldn't you help us? Well, some people are more concerned with what percentage are they paying the agent versus are they getting the most value? Are they getting finding the right piece of property?
Exactly.
And, oh, okay. Yeah. That makes, yeah. Oh, it's definitely more important for us to do that. And now you're having a dialogue about what they're trying to achieve, like what they're trying to overcome rather than what it is that you're selling.
I love that. So you're really positioning yourself as well as, hard to reach, hard to work with. You only have a select few clients. I have seen a lot of people do this, especially for coaching or some kind of mastermind. You have to apply to get in, which gives that perceived notion that it's difficult to get in. Not everyone's accepted. and we don't take everyone, and that's okay.
What I'm more trying to get to is that it's less the manipulation and false scarcity.
Right.
And it's more about just being brutally honest that says half the people we talk to are not a good fit. It might be that, like, for example, in my business, they might have something that doesn't differentiate. They might be selling products and services that aren't a high enough price point, which means it doesn't make sense to invest in improving that. Mm-hmm. It might be that they've got major flaws in how they deliver their services. And my position would be, well, don't invest in selling it if you can't deliver it. Like, get your delivery house in order first, then we'll worry about selling more of it. Right now, if you sold more, you're just going to have more disappointed clients. That's not a good model. Yeah. So there are various factors. It's not so much, oh, you can't get in and it's a limited time and it's going to expire tomorrow, unless, of course, you don't buy tomorrow, in which case it'll expire the next day. And if you don't buy by then, like, those things I'm not a fan of, because I believe everything should be with integrity. But the idea is you want to focus on the right organizations. Like, for example, in my business, my engagements are structured where I work with a small number of clients each quarter, and they invest in my help, and there's a success fee component. So when I'm selecting my clients, I'm saying, okay, I want the people where I see the highest potential success fee, which is the people I can help grow the most. So there's case studies on my site of companies that before working with me, they went from 14 million to 17 million. The 3 years after, they went from 17 to 109. Like, I want that upside, not the little bit of incremental improvement.
Right.
And it's just finding the right fit. And what I often say is we want to look at the places where we can have the greatest positive impact for the clients. Those are the people who will appreciate you the most. If you're just kind of a rounding error for them, why bother? Like, you're not really adding much value, so just get out of the way.
I agree. And so whenever you're doing that call, or you're doing the discovery to see how can you help this person, are there certain things that you're looking for? How do you know exactly who's a good fit? I'm just curious.
So there's a process that I follow. So I've done research with over 10,000 executives on how they make and approve decisions. And I put them in a scenario where I say, okay, here's this thing. I call it a Gezeitenblad. It costs $20,000, takes the vendor 30 days to implement it for you, requires no resources on your part. They give you a 10-year guarantee. What are the 5 questions you have to get answered to be comfortable making an informed decision to approve or deny that purchase? So I put executives in groups to do this collaboratively. Then we have them narrowed down to 3 questions. And they ask the same 3 questions every time, whether it's a small startup or whether it's a multi-billion-dollar multinational. Virtually any place on the planet, they ask the same 3 questions. And the questions are these. First question they ask is, what problem does this solve for us? So someone on their team says, hey, I want to buy this Gezeitenblad. It's $20,000. They go, well, what problem are we trying to solve with this thing that you want to spend 20 grand for? Next question they ask is, why do we need it? So why do we need it is in essence, financial justification.
ROI, yeah.
More or less, you're saying, what happens if we don't solve that problem? And then the third question is, what's the likely result or outcome? That's more the ROI question that says, so if we got this, what would change? What would be different? What's our expectation of the outcome we're going to get? Now, there's a distant fourth in all this, which is, what are the alternatives? And the reason that's a distant fourth is what people tell me when we go through this exercise. I said, well, why is that in fourth place? They're like, well, because if we have a vendor and we're in total sync with them about what problem we're trying to solve, and we also understand what happens if we don't solve it, and that's the vendor we feel has the highest likelihood of delivering the best results, then that's our vendor. We don't care about number 4. Like, we've already answered it with the first 3. So if the way that you are communicating with your clients today is not aligned with those questions, you're actually lengthening rather than shortening the sales cycle. So when we're talking to people, the questions that we're asking fall into a sequence of what I call the same side quadrants. So if you take a blank sheet of paper, drew a vertical line down the page, horizontal line across the page, creating 4 quadrants. This is a method for taking notes with our clients and prospects. In the upper left quadrant, we take notes around the issue, which is, so, gee, what inspired you to meet with us today? What were you hoping to address? So it's the superficial part that says, oh, we've got this problem, this issue that we're trying to discover. In the upper right quadrant, we take notes about what we call impact and importance. So impact is the answer to the question of what happens if you don't solve this. And importance is compared to other things on your plate, how important is it to solve this right now? In the lower left quadrant, we take notes about the results. And the results piece comes down to, so let's say we work together and we did everything you're hoping for. What would we measure 6 months down the road, 9 months down the road, a year down the road, so that you knew this was the right decision, it worked out well? What are we going to measure together? And then the lower right quadrant, we take notes around the others impacted. So people often make a mistake of asking, especially in business environments, this awful question, which is, so who's the decision maker? And you could ask the janitor and the janitor will say they are. It doesn't matter who you ask. But instead, you want to ask questions like, so who else would have an opinion about the impact? Who else would have an opinion about how we measure results? Who else would chime in the 11th hour we haven't talked to before, who might either approve this thing or kill it? Those are the people you need to have involved. Mm-hmm. So that structure makes it so that you can quickly determine if an opportunity is real or not. And the way you can determine it's real is you look at the information in the upper right quadrant for impact and importance, and you see how well quantified that is in terms of what happens if they don't solve it. Then you look at the value that's been summarized in the lower left quadrant of result, and the delta between those is the value of the solution.
Okay.
And so if you say, gee, the problem is costing them $2 million a year, and the result, if you fix this for them, would be an upside of $6 million a year, the delta between those is $8 million. So here's the irony. If you said, oh yeah, I can solve that for you, and it's going to cost $5,000, the client says, nah, it's BS. I don't believe you could actually solve an $8 million problem for $5,000. Like, it's not believable.
Right. It's got to be more like a bigger ticket.
Yeah. So it's like, look, we could do this. Here's the process would take. It'll probably cost you 5 to 10% of that to get there. Is that worth doing? Oh yeah, that's great. Because if they believe you can get there, then it's a trivial investment.
That's powerful. I actually heard this recently on another podcast, someone talking about deal structure where they negotiated a percentage of the upside if this thing that seems improbable happens. And so, like you said, 5 to 6% or 5 to 7% doesn't sound like very much. Yeah, that's worth it. And then you deliver on the results, and you also get to benefit with the upside. That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's interesting. In our same side selling academy, we don't participate in the upside. People just subscribe. They're members. They get access to it. We do monthly coaching with them, and they've got access to all the content. There's new content every month. That's fine. The strategic clients I work with, all of them have a component to the engagement that has the success fee that's not unlike what you just talked about. And it's one of those things where people say, okay, yeah, if you can help me grow from this to that, sure, I'll be paying you a lot of money, but who cares?
Right. Because if you can't, then they won't. And they're making money too. If you're making money, that means they're making more money.
Yeah. If you're taking a small percentage, if you say, okay, I'm going to take a few percent of the upside. Okay. So that means that for every $1 million I put in your pocket, you're paying $30,000.
Yeah. They take that every day of the week.
Exactly. Like, okay, I want to do that again, which is kind of the business you're in, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing is whenever you're actually in a business where the person is seeing a result, I think a ratio that I heard is the expense or the cost should be, the profit that the customer or client should get is 10x what you are charging for that thing, which I guess maybe isn't so applicable in real estate unless you're looking at equity and cash flow for rental properties. But say I was charging 10 grand for a course, I would expect for them to make $100,000, 10x the investment. And so if you follow that model, I mean, I love how you're saying 5 to 7%. I'm trying to figure out how can I implement this in my real estate business, maybe for clients that are wanting to invest in properties and learn at what to look at. I could have some kind of course or something or be like, hey, 5 to 7% equity in your properties that I help you find and source, and I won't even take a commission. So we can roll in and I'll have equity in all these properties. I'm just thinking outside the box now because you're getting my creative juices flowing. So I love it.
All right. And I just want 5 to 7% of that.
Sounds so reasonable, 5 to 7% of my 5 to 7%.
Yeah, you're going to get, I want 5 to 7% of your 5 to 7%.
Hey, if I figure out how to make that work with my clients, why not?
All right, dude, I'm going to be standing there with my hand open waiting for it.
I tell friends all the time, I'm like, hey, because of this thing that you taught me, whenever I'm successful, I'm going to remember you, So I don't mind
and then you're playing like a round of golf. Like you made an extra $4 million. You're like, Hey, here, I bought you this Pez dispenser.
Here you go. Yeah. I was joking with someone about that too. I mean, when they used to give you the gold watch or whatever at retirement, I mean, it seems great, but is it really for 40 years of your service or whatever the thing is? It's like 10 grand for a watch really isn't that much if you look at it from that perspective. So similarly, if I were making millions of dollars from an idea that someone gave me, okay, I'm happy to write a $40,000 or $50,000 check to thank them for that down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fascinating way to look at it. I mean, the reality is that these concepts, like once people start understanding it, then they start feeling like, wait, we're worth way more than what we're charging.
Yeah.
And the reason why people use that concept of 10 times the cost is because your clients are skeptical and they say, well, maybe you won't deliver this, so I'm going to discount it. If they were 100% certain that you could deliver, they would probably happily pay a much higher percentage. So it wouldn't have to be 10%. It could be 50%. In fact, if you said to somebody, hey, look, I can either charge you, gee, I'm going to do something that's going to generate $100,000 for you. I can charge you $10,000 to do that, whether it works or not. Or I can take 30% only if we're successful. A lot of clients would say, yeah, I'll pay the 30% if it's successful. And then when it is, they're like, oh man, I could have had that for 10 grand. Right. Yeah, you could have. and it demonstrates your ability to do that. So in my business, oftentimes if someone balks at the success fee, I'm like, okay, well, you can pay me 3 times that amount up front if you prefer. I'm just trying to make it so that it's back end loaded. And what they'll often say is, yeah, but with your track record, I know we're going to pay the success fee. I'm like, so what are you worried about?
Problem?
Exactly. Like it's okay. And so that's part of what I try to get people to understand, which is too often entrepreneurs sell resources, not results. What I mean is They'll say, okay, I'm selling so many hours. Here's what I'm charging per hour for this. No one wants to buy effort. Like if you need a security guard, guess what? You're going to pay by the hour because maybe your event runs a little bit longer and you need to do that. But if you're hiring babysitters, maybe the same thing. But fundamentally, in almost every other business, people don't care. Like no one sits at home and says, you know what I really want is I want like 6.5 hours of someone who knows content marketing. It's like, it doesn't happen. They say, look, I got this problem attracting customers to my business. I need to solve this. And someone's convinced me that content marketing is the way to do it. So if this is successful, it's going to generate $50,000 a quarter in new business for us. And if someone came in and said, oh yeah, we can do content marketing for you for $50, they're like, well, there's no way you can generate 50 grand a month or a quarter for that. So that's not credible anymore. And so the idea is that people often will pitch the client and say, okay, I'm going to charge you this much per video. I'm going to charge you this much per hour. I'm going to charge you this much per minute. No one cares. If you just said, hey, I'm going to build this on a fixed fee basis. Here's what it's going to deliver. Here's what it won't deliver. Here's the fixed fee for that. The client says, is that worth it or isn't it? Yeah, it'd be worth it to get that. Great. And now you're not selling hours. And then what happens is, as a business, you start focusing on, how do I operate more efficiently and effectively at delivering those outcomes instead of rewarding people for working more hours?
Right.
If you think about it, if we were doing work for somebody and someone said, wow, I'm trying to figure out how to capture attention and stand out from my competitors, and I want to make sure that I'm selling at a much higher margin. Would the client rather have somebody who's going to do that in more hours or in fewer hours?
Fewer
right?
hours.
So fewer hours. Okay.
Faster.
So if you charge by the hour, the more efficient you are, the less you're rewarded for it.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
It's crazy, but it's the way most businesses operate.
Right.
Is they get into that mindset, and it's an awful way to do things.
It really is.
So I just try to get people to think differently about that, so that you're not trapped in this environment where you're selling resources, not results.
Exactly. I forget which book it was. Maybe it was like a Rich Dad, Poor Dad type of book where they talk about even high-end professionals, maybe attorneys charging $400 an hour. they have to be trading that time for money to be earning that money. When you can separate time from money, that's when you are rewarded for efficiency. I mean, I had a $20,000 commission check on a deal where I think I spent like 4 or 5 hours tops. Yeah. And I was just like calculating the per hour income on some of these deals. And I'm like, wow, that's really good. But alternatively, I have also had the deals where, man, I took a little concession on the commission. It was the biggest pain in my butt. And I do the per hour calculation. I'm like, this wasn't even worth my time. Like, this is the smallest deal.
$8 an hour.
Yeah. I'm basically working minimum wage for this deal here. So knowing that is important.
And one of the ways to kind of illustrate this is the following. So let's say you had 2 different vendors. And let me step back for a second, because if you ask most entrepreneurs, if you say, all right, I want you to think of the buyer-seller interaction. So the buyer-seller interaction starts with that initial contact. It could be the initial contact with your website. It could be the initial contact with an individual. It doesn't matter. Starts with the initial contact. The finish line is where we as the entrepreneurs are celebrating, everybody's high-fiving. So what do people generally call the finish line?
I guess.
So the sale, the contract, close, the check clearing, whatever it happens to be. The problem with that is that what does the client see as the finish line? The client sees the finish line as a result or outcome.
Right.
So now let's say you had 2 different vendors pitching some service to you, Chris, and one of them comes to you and says, well, who needs to sign off on this? What do we need to do to get this contract? What's going to take for us to get you into this agreement today, Chris? In essence, the used car salesman. And the other person says, so Chris, what are we going to measure together to know we're successful? What could get in the way, even if we do everything right on our end, what could get in the way of you achieving those results? So given those 2, which one would you rather deal with, the first one or the second one?
The second one for sure. They're not trying to force me to sign something ASAP without results. Talk about the results.
Focus on results. So how much more might you be willing to pay for the second one versus the first one?
A premium for that. If they can achieve the results that they're comfortable.
What percentage do you think?
5 to 7%, Martin.
No, really, what percentage more would you be willing to pay?
I'd say maybe, 40, 50% more.
Okay. So the numbers I hear range from usually 20 to 50% more.
Yeah.
And let me ask it in a different way. How much less would you have to pay for it to be a good deal, but you don't get the results that you need?
How much less? I guess,
100% less, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much less it is. If you don't get the results you need,
it doesn't
matter what you paid for it. It was a bad deal.
Exactly.
So having that mindset makes it so that as entrepreneurs, people realize, okay, I've got to focus on the results with my clients or prospects. Because if I'm just selling resources, if I'm just creating time for money, I'm not really selling results. At best, I'm selling effort.
Right.
But here's the beauty. If I deliver amazing results, what's the likelihood that I'm going to get repeat and referral business from you?
Very, very high.
And if I don't, then, piss off. Like, you can be the nicest guy in the world. I'm not going to refer other people to you. Oh, really? Did you work with Chris? Yeah, it was okay. Right? You don't want that as a referral. You want someone who says, oh yeah, man, it was amazing. And so that focus on results becomes really a central way to evaluate whether or not you're focused on selling what I call hyper value, or are you just out there pitching services or product?
Yeah. That's how you really separate yourself from the competition. It rang so true when you mentioned earlier, like, do you think someone's just sitting around wondering like, oh, I want to buy 6 hours of someone's like time today? Like, no, it doesn't happen. They care about what's the problem they're having. And another thing that I've heard recently that rings true is like, don't just talk about the features, talk about the benefits. Like what are the actual benefits? Not just like, oh, this is what product A does. This is what product B does. No one cares about that. They want the result. They want to be able to picture themselves in real estate, for example, that problem property, they want it gone. They want the money in their bank account or their dream home, right? Like, I want to be moved inside and done with this all.
Sure. There's an interesting nuance to that, which is, so if you think about the benefits of the results, you can't even sell the benefits on their own. You have to sell to the problem. And here's why.
Right.
I'll give you an example. So let's say I was a surgeon and I perform tennis elbow surgery. And I say to you, hey, Chris, listen, Great meeting you. I've got a slot open next Thursday, 10 a.m. for you to come in. We're going to do tennis elbow surgery. In fact, our surgical center is the best on the planet. The recovery period, you won't even have any discomfort. Most people say they have discomfort for about 12 minutes. Then it goes away. Feel fantastic. In fact, most people that come out of the anesthesia, they feel like they've had like 2 nights of sleep. It's amazing. So how about we set you up for next Thursday? And you're thinking, but I don't have tennis elbow. And so the thing is that in that case, I'm sharing all the benefits, but if you don't have that underlying condition, you don't care. So even pitching benefits isn't enough. What we have to sell, and it sounds counterintuitive, but we have to sell to the problems that we solve, not sell to the features and or benefits, because no one cares about the features or benefits if they don't feel they have the problem or condition that warrants that. So you think about it, it'd be like saying, well, this drug is safer than that drug. You're like, yeah, but I don't have either of those conditions. So which one do you want to take? It's like, well, neither, because I don't need it.
Right.
And so it's the same sort of thing. And so it's a lot of entrepreneurs will say, well, we used to talk about our features. Now we talk about the benefits and still nobody cares. Yeah, because they don't know why they need it. So if you've ever had a situation, and I'm thinking of your listeners, if your listeners have ever had a situation where they describe what they do and the client or prospect says, well, that sounds really interesting. So how do your other clients use that? What they're really asking is, wow, that's interesting. What problem does that solve? Why do people need it to begin with?
Right.
Because it sounds kind of interesting. I just don't know why anyone would need that.
Makes sense.
And so that's another way to think about it.
No, there's a lot of great stuff here. I mean, I wrote that down too. You have to sell the problem, not just the benefits, because maybe they do need the solution that you're offering, but they're not even problem aware or aware, like the example earlier. If they're losing $2 million a year and they could be, I guess, netting 8 million, whatever the numbers were that we talked about, if they don't know about that, they don't care. But if you can highlight that and show them through numbers, maybe through data or something like that they have through their company, that's when you can start to track and measure the results and offer those solutions. So lots of great nuggets here that we talked about today.
Sure. Yeah. And I'll tell you that one of the kind of subtle nuances there is that oftentimes, to the point that you just raised, your client or prospect doesn't know that they're having the problem. So your ideal client is not the person who's already identified the problem and said to you, oh, it looks like you guys solved this, so I want you to come out and talk to us. Your ideal client is the person who, when you describe the problem, they all of a sudden say,
That's
I have those symptoms. I just realized at this moment while you're here, and now that you've helped me diagnose it, naturally, my first thought is, can you help me fix it? And so now it's your client to lose, as opposed to the client who already says, for example, you have a party, someone spills something on your carpet, you need a carpet cleaner. So you call up 3 different carpet cleaners, and what do you ask them? Well, what's it going to cost to take this out? Right? Let's say that at your party, someone was there who runs a carpet cleaning service and says, oh yeah, the key to this type of stain, see, it was this type of product. So I'm glad I was here to see it, because now our team knows exactly what product to use to get that out. And as long as someone comes here by 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, you don't have to worry. It's not going to be a permanent stain. Just enjoy the rest of the evening. You'll be fine. You're not going to go, well, let me get some quotes tomorrow. You're going to be like,
you're going with that guy.
Can they be out here tomorrow morning? Yeah, because what happened is they just demonstrated their subject matter expertise. Now, if the guy says, yeah, I can clean that, it's going to be $10,000. You're like, well, let me just make sure that's in the ballpark. But if the guy says, hey, it's $150, your spouse says, well, I wonder if we can find someone for $100. You're like, for $50, I know it's done in the morning. Like, like who cares?
Exactly. No, that's so true. I'm just thinking about that. I mean, I recently bought a bike like a week or two ago, and the same thing. I walked into the store and I was like, reputable place, has good reviews. Like, I don't care if the store down the street has the same bike for $200 less, right? It's not at a certain price point. To an extent, if it's like $10,000 for this bike, I'm like, do I really need this high level of a bike, or can I go with that other one that's like 2,000 or whatever?
Yeah, it's funny. I remember a few years ago, we have an SUV that our kids drive, and it's parked up front, and this huge pine tree in a storm fell over and like basically turned it into a convertible. I think it's leveled. So we find a replacement SUV that we want to get for him. We drive to the dealership, and I said to my wife, I said, you know what? The price I've listed at is not an unreasonable price. It's roughly in the right ballpark. So if these guys are playing games, then I'm going to negotiate. And one of us teaches negotiation, and I'm pretty sure the other ones don't. So, but if they just accept what I'm presenting to them, then this will be fine. But otherwise, I'm going to extract another $1,000 out of the deal. My wife's like, what? I'm like, well, one way we're going to be in and out in 10 minutes. The other way, it's going to take 45 minutes. But if they're going to waste my time, then I'm going to extract more out of them.
Right.
And so I said, look, so here's this. I've looked. I know this isn't the lowest price for this vehicle. I also know it isn't the highest price. So if we're in and out here in 5 minutes, that's fine. Let me check with so-and-so. Well, I don't know if we can do that, this and that. I look at my wife and she goes, uh-oh. Right? It's like,
here we go.
and we 45 minutes later, we paid $1,000 less than that.
You already know how the game goes. Yeah.
It's like, dude, if you had just said yes, you would have made an extra $1,000 on the sale. But you were trying, like, you weren't content making $1,500 on the deal. You wanted to make you wanted to make $2,000 on it.
Right.
So now you made $500 on it. Like, oh, well.
It's funny. I guess it happens so often where people try to like really just stick with their side, or they just want to play hardball. And it ends up being, people think that it's a lose-win situation when it really can be win-win, which, I mean, I love the name of your book, Same Side Selling. You're not trying to be combative and say that I have to win or you lose for it to be a deal. Like, we can both win. We can both accomplish it. Could have been out of there in 5 minutes, but they refused to play your game.
Exactly. Yeah. It's, you know what, it was kind of a funny experience. And the funny part is, when I had bought, I drive a Tesla. And when I had bought it years ago, I went in and I said to the guy, I said, yeah, so I think I want to get this winter package with the heated seats. And the rep goes, you live in the DC area. You can turn on the heat in the car via your phone. If there's another reason for you to get it, that's great. I just don't know if it makes sense for you to spend the extra $7,000 on the winter package. I mean, if it's, I don't want to talk you out of it. I just want you to consider that you have that capability. I'm like, that's a great point. And from that moment, I was like, all right, anything this person says, I trust, because they had an opportunity to sell me something and they talked me out of it. So now,
powerful.
Anything else they say, it's like, oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we should add that. Yeah, whatever. And you're talking about, I mean, it's, it wasn't an inexpensive purchase. So, there was certainly opportunity for them to add in other components that some we needed, some we didn't, but that level of integrity comes through.
Exactly. That's something very powerful too in like real estate sales, especially when it comes to like motivated sellers for investor purposes, where you let them know all the options. Like, hey, my offer is going to be kind of low. It probably doesn't even make sense. You should just list this with a real estate agent. And if they are in a tight spot or they haven't made payments in a few months, the thing is, like, heck no, I don't want to go to the real estate agent. I want to sell it today. And because you gave me those options, this is just kind of like, the loops in my head are tying. This is a very similar example. When you come forward with the honesty and all the options available, and you let people know, hey, I understand if I'm not the right fit for you, that attracts them to you even more in so many cases, which is such a great feeling, especially if you're authentic about it, not just doing the sales trick.
Exactly. Yeah. Sales is not about manipulation. It's about getting to the truth as quickly as possible. And so if you can do that with integrity and you get to the truth very quickly, then it works out better for everybody. And it's a hard lesson for a lot of people. And when they get it, they end up having amazing success.
I love that. Sales is about getting to the truth as quickly as possible. Awesome. Gosh, so many things. Ian, did we miss anything? Are there any last minute tips that you think we should run through real quick? Or
you know what? There's all sorts of stuff we could talk about, Chris, but I think even trains stop. So,
That's true.
Obviously if people have additional questions, they can feel free to reach out to me on social media. I'm Ian Altman, just about everywhere. And if they go to samesideselling.com, there's kind of a cool assessment we have that gives people a sense of how much on the same side are they. Like, do they operate in a same side mindset, or is it more adversarial? That people find pretty helpful. And we don't subject people to a life of spam. It's just more to give them a little bit of insight.
That's another great selling point there is like, oh, we're not going to just put you on a million different lists. We're actually going to give you the value. But I love whenever people offer those kinds of assessments, because it is interesting to see a lot of people may have that enlightening moment of, oh, I am kind of combative whenever I try to negotiate on things. Maybe I need to shift my approach a little bit. So I will put all the links in the show notes for people to reach out to you and get in contact if they have any questions. And thank you once again, Ian.
You bet, Chris. This was fun.
Definitely. Thanks so much and take care. We'll be in touch.